One of my favorite lines from a movie is from Sabrina, where the lead character Sabrina gets an unexpected airplane ticket to Paris. And she says, Paris is always a good idea. And I couldn't agree more. That's why I was so excited to be able to have a conversation today on the Real Food Traveler podcast with our Europe editor, travel writer Irvina Lew. I'm Courtney Drake-McDonough. I'm the publisher and managing editor of RealFoodTraveler.com, which is a digital culinary travel magazine. And we also have this podcast, which is another way to just bring personal stories and flavor to everything we write about on the site. So, Irvina, welcome. And I'm so glad we could get together today. You and I are friends, but you are also one of my most valued writers. And as I said, our Europe editor, because you have such wonderful experience in Europe and specifically in France. So let me turn it over to you and let you introduce yourself and tell our listeners a little bit more about who you are and your connections to Paris.
Well, I'm thrilled to do that. When you ask about my relationship with France and Paris, it really goes back to being in the ninth grade when I was introduced to Julie Franchi, Mademoiselle Franchi, and she was my French teacher. And just as a little note, I became a French teacher. She very much inspired me. And in my sophomore year, she was my history teacher. Not that I was assigned to her class. I proactively lobbied to get out of the class I was assigned to get into her class, because she had a way with history, which wasn't dates and wars and stuff. It was people and places and architecture and beauty. And she truly inspired me. And so she was my French teacher throughout high school. She was I was the editor in chief of the yearbook, and she was the person in charge. So
Mm-hmm.
we ended up with a really warm relationship that spanned 4 years. And I went to college. I majored in French. And after my sophomore year, I studied at the Sorbonne, which it's only in retrospect that I realize how much that summer in Paris changed my life. I became a French teacher and eventually a travel writer and an author. And I really focus on France. And I'm going to jump to the pandemic when my third apartment rental in Cannes was canceled due to COVID. And of course, I was filled with all the conflicting fears and worries and the global tragedy. But at the same time, I was truly miserable about missing my 3 weeks in France. And I started writing these anecdotes and vignettes. And as you know, I've been writing about France and French food and French spas and for 30 years. But with COVID, I found my 1958 trip diary. I found menus from the 70s at Maxine. I just scoured the house for old notebooks. I always take a notebook on every trip. And my husband always used to say, you have to date the top of the page, which I did. And I found all these souvenirs. And anyway, I wrote Forays in France. And the first one I wrote was about the Riviera because I had missed it so much. But immediately I had to start writing about Paris. So now I'm about to self-publish Forays in France, a flavorful memoir of Paris. And it's going to be in a series of 3 books: a flavorful memoir of Paris, a flavorful memoir of the Riviera, and then a flavorful memoir of wine regions. So much for that. And I will certainly announce it on realfoodtraveler.com, I hope. But I was last in Paris in May. And of course, I was looking for restaurants, as I always do. And we can talk about Paris now.
Thank you for introducing your book series because I'm so excited for them to come out. And absolutely, yes, we will be featuring all 3 of them as they come out on realfoodtraveler.com. Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about why you think Paris continues to hold such a draw for people.
Well, it's the number one visited city in the world. I just learned that this morning on a YouTube. And I understand that in 2025, it's going to have the most visited, well, France will have the most visited tourists in the world. It has to be the architecture. It has to be the way Haussmann laid out the city and the circles and the pie-shaped square, the plus, the squares. So after the architecture, there is truly a joie de vivre. The French buy flowers for their tables. When you walk into a store, you must say bonjour, madame, bonjour, monsieur. There's a politesse, a politeness, which is ingrained. If you go up to a person and say, where is this? Or can I find that? Or how much is that? They will ignore you and they will say, bonjour, madame, to remind you that first you say hello. So there's not only the beauty in the environment with the street scenes and the river and the Belle Époque and the Haussmann style architecture and the monuments that are so gorgeous, but the whole scale of the city, there are 6-story high buildings so that you can see the monuments. But then there's the beauty of the way people treat each other. People speak softly, they're polite. Food at the markets is presented like a piece of artwork. I could go on and on. It's just my happy place, and but I'm not alone in that, am I?
No, no. And it's funny you mentioned the flowers because when I was in my early 20s and a young single, newly career girl, there used to be little flower markets here in Denver where I live. And every week on Fridays, I would allow myself to buy a little bouquet of flowers to take home for the week. And even though I hadn't been to France at that point, I felt very Parisian doing that. I somehow just sensed that that was a thing that they would do in Paris, and so I wanted to do that too. So I love that you mentioned that in particular. Now you've written about Paris a lot for Real Food Traveler, which is fabulous, and I will link to some of those articles in the article that we'll have connected to this podcast on the site. But you've returned there many times in recent years. Do you typically return to some of your favorite haunts every time, or do you seek out new experiences every time you go?
I seek out new restaurants in part because there are so many. I can never get to, 1/100th of how many wonderful restaurants there are. But I do go back to certain places. I love the L'Orangerie because I'm a fan of Monet's water lilies. I try to always get back to the Musée d'Orsay. Oh, by the way, downstairs underneath Monet's water lilies, although it wasn't there in May, it was being lent to another city. But there is a couple of Renoirs, and one Renoir is of 2 girls at the piano. And I was 19 in France the first time, and I saw those 2 beautiful girls with their long hair sitting at the piano. And I thought, oh, that's what motherhood is like. I want to have a
Mhm.
baby kind of thing. It's like my experience with motherhood, even though one of my daughters played the piano, was nothing like the Renoir scenes. But I always go back to that museum. I love the Musée d'Orsay. I like to walk along the Seine on the quay, particularly from the left bank. There are lots of things I do again and again and again. I always used to go the first morning when I arrived after an overnight flight from New York. I would take a boat ride on the Seine. And there are many different opportunities to do that, from the bateau mouche, which means the boats, fly boats, the tourist boats, to the bateau parisien. In recent years, I've done the gorgeous dinner, the Ducasse sur Seine gourmet dinner. And then there's another thing called bateau bus, which is a wonderful way to tour Paris, where it's a hop on, hop off boat that goes through the center of Paris on the river, which I love riding in boats because you just see the city in its full glory. So I always try to do that. So there are lots of things. I go back to the Rodin Museum when I can. I'm a museum goer as well as a restaurant person. I like to have lunch. I should say that I go back to Hotel Cost, particularly if it's raining. They have sort of an interior courtyard that feels like you're outside, but you're inside. And it's just glorious. And I go to the Café de la Paix across from the opera, and Café Fauchon across from the Madeleine. I am inspired by being in a beautiful place. And I don't have a lot of money for food, but I order carefully, and I like to sit and I like to sip coffee or sip wine. And I'm not one for standing at a crepe stand or, going to the kebab shops and eating on the run. And of course, I'm older and I walk for an hour and a half, but then I want to sit and I want to sit for an hour. So I might order a cheese plate or a pate or and just have that with bread and a glass of wine. And so, or have a pizza or a quiche. And, but I do it in the most beautiful places. And likewise with the Michelin star restaurants, I like to go to the Michelin star restaurants in hotels like La Reserve has Le Gabriel or Le Crillon, Les Crins, or St. James, Bellefeuille. And you get a double whammy when you're in a gorgeous, gorgeous hotel where you can sit in the lobby for a bit, whether or not you order coffee or a drink, and you have your fine restaurant meals in the most gorgeous places. And some of them, Le Gabrielle, for one, has a really good, well-priced, fixed-price lunch. And by the way, I often, usually, have my big fancy meals at lunch because they're so much cheaper and you're not drinking as much. And I just find, and then you walk afterwards. And I'm not good at night eating these huge meals at night. So I could have a slice of pizza at night. That's some of what I do.
Well, sounds wonderful. At the time we're recording this podcast, it's just before the 2024 Summer Olympics being held in Paris, and you wrote a wonderful article recommending restaurants to visit when attending the games. In addition to visiting some of those places, are there some other casual, maybe inexpensive, by Paris standards, places to grab a bite and eat like a local? Like you mentioned food carts a little bit, but other little hole-in-the-wall places or markets, that kind of thing?
I'm not the person for hole in the wall. I'm not the person for food stands. I'm not the person for bargains. I don't get to Paris often enough to try to be cheap. At home, I don't go to McDonald's. I don't go to little restaurants. I eat home, I make my meals. But when I'm away, I'm eating out 3 times a day. I save money, I think, by always having protein at breakfast in the hotel. If they have smoked salmon or they have eggs or something, I will eat a big breakfast and then I can, just have a cheese plate or something. But you won't find me knowing the holes in the wall because if I'm in Paris for 10 days or 11 days, or even in 21, I was there for 3 weeks or most of 3 weeks. We spent 3 days in Champagne and 2 nights in Versailles, but I'm not in the city often enough to want to miss being in beautiful places. What I do like is eating in museums. The Musée d'Orsay. I've eaten in 2 restaurants in the Musée d'Orsay, and I eat it at the cafe at the Fondation Louis Vuitton. I eat in museums. At the Louvre, I've been to Cafe Marley, but these are not inexpensive places. The Design Museum had a wonderful cafe. I wrote about it a couple of years ago. But I don't know. I see lines at these places on the street, and I don't want to do that. I want to sit on the terrace and people watch. And one of the things I do to save money is order un carafe d'eau. It's the word carafe. Dough is spelled D apostrophe EAU, although it's pronounced like OH. And un carafe d'eau is free. And if you order a bottle of water, it costs as much as a glass of wine. So I order water, I tip generously. I might just order a dessert and coffee, but I will sit someplace beautiful. So holes in the wall for other people.
What about going to one of the marchés, one of the food markets?
I went to a food market recently and I wrote about it for you as a part of the cooking class at La Cuisine Paris. And we had a wonderful market tour. And well, we weren't really touring, we were buying. We bought the food at the market. I love going to a market, but and I see they have wonderful paella and they have beautiful in the south of France, they have the pissaladière, the olive and the onion, the pizzas. But I don't like to eat standing up. So mostly I'll buy food to take back if I have an apartment. But in Paris, I don't have an apartment. I go to a museum, and after I tour a museum, I want to sit someplace. So if I'm in a market, I buy gifts, I buy fresh raspberries, or my friend loves little currants, but I don't shop for food because I don't want to eat standing up. In Barcelona, there are a lot of restaurants inside the markets. So I haven't eaten in markets in Paris that way, at restaurants in markets, like there used to be at Les Halles. When that was in Paris, there were restaurants and cafes inside, but that hasn't been my experience. And I remember writing something for you about restaurants near popular places.
Hmm.
I am much more, and I don't want to be redundant about it, but I go to a place, whether it's the Louvre or the d'Orsay or shopping in the Marais or something, and then I want to sit. I did discover my husband used to love Angelina for the hot chocolate. There's a big line at Angelina at the Rue de Rivoli. And this year I was delighted to go to Carrette on the Place des Vosges. There's another one I think in the Trocadero, but where you're sitting underneath a vaulted arcade and you're looking at this garden. That's more my style, even if I only order hot chocolate.
Hmm. That makes sense. From your recent visit, and you just mentioned it a moment ago, you did attend a cooking class when you were in Paris, and I think taking cooking classes and going on food tours are wonderful ways to get to know the local culinary scene when you visit a destination. Tell us about that cooking class experience and how it connected you to the local food scene.
Well, La Cuisine Paris, I did the market tour cooking class, and we had an entire meal, including duck breasts and a souffle. It was just a wonderful, wonderful meal that we made. But they have classes in typically French things like macaron. And it's a beautiful little cooking school. It's right on the quay in the historic first arrondissement. And this everybody should know if you've not been to Paris. Paris is divided into 20 districts, and they're called arrondissements. And you find them on what they call it's like our zip code. It's the last two digits of the zip code. So if it ends in a 1, it's in the first. If it ends in a 16, it's in the very chic residential 16th. Or if it ends in a 6, it's in the Saint-Germain-des-Prés. So you learn those districts, and some are more swank and some are. Today I just learned that it's recommended if you're going to the Olympics to stay in 18, 19, 20, 13, 14, those districts that are a little bit outside the center being the islands in the Seine, de la Cité or Ile Saint-Louis. That was where Paris started thousands of years ago, and then it went over in the left bank and the right bank. So the arrondissement closest to the Seine have the lowest numbers. So it's the third, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh being like the Eiffel Tower. The eighth is very chic. And the cooking class is in the first, in an older building. And, you're all working around a great big long table, which is set up with your own knife and your own cutting board, and you do everything together. And it's with a wonderful teacher who's bilingual. It's Jane Birch, who wrote The French Ingredient, founded the cooking school, and it's designed for Americans. And I met a woman there, and she goes back and back and back. She goes to Paris twice a year. I was just emailing with her today, and she goes to France twice a year. That's her lifestyle, and she stays at a little place that she's been staying at for 20 years, and she always takes a cooking class, and they're all different kinds of suggestions.
That sounds dreamy. I love the idea of that.
I take cooking class particularly at spas, and there's never an occasion when I don't learn something new. I
Hmm.
mean, this time, did you ever know about taking the germ out of the garlic? I smashed the garlic and cut it up. I never pulled out the germ before, but I always learn something. And this time, the chef was Cyril. There was one thing that I've learned to do. He uses an enormous sheet of broiler strength Reynolds wrap, and you're cooking the duck, and I cook everything in one little black cast iron. It could be a duck breast, it could be foie gras, it could be a steak, and once it's seared, but before it's done, you wrap the whole thing in the tin foil and you take it off the flame and it continues cooking in the hot pan. And it's just so perfect and so easy. So that was really something that I learned on this trip.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm gonna have to try that. How much longer do you keep it off the flame, though? How do you know?
He did it for 10 minutes. He did
Oh,
it for,
okay.
yeah.
Okay.
He seared it and took it off the flame and left it for 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it's something I'll have to work on because I make, if I do one little fillet, I eat alone a lot, but I do make like one veal chop or one fillet, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that that particular class had you going to the market because I love taking cooking classes too, and you walk in and everything's ready for you and everything's already been purchased and washed and all of
Yeah.
that, and I like that pre part too to help you know how to choose some of those items. So that was great.
And the thing is, at a market, you have many, many different choices. So when you're going with a chef, they know which has the best produce or which place is the best fish, because of their experience. So the first timer just doesn't know which purveyor is going to be the best. And if you trust the chef, that chef usually goes back and back and back. People go to the same markets every week or a few times a week. So they know which one has the freshest or the best.
Yeah. There are going to be a lot of first timers visiting Paris during these Olympics in July, and of course, people will be visiting Paris for a long time, or for their first time, long after these games are over. Do you have any recommendations for getting by in Paris, maybe from a language perspective?
I do. From a language perspective, and this is the French teacher, I already mentioned, you really have to greet people. It's like you're not going to get any kind of positive response if you don't. So and my husband, who didn't speak a word of French, had five things. One of them was oui, oui. He said oui, 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 very convincingly. He'd nod his head and smile, and everybody thought that he understood them. But you want to say nicely, and you can do this online, just listen to it on a Google Translate. Bonjour, monsieur. Au revoir, madame. Merci, madame, just the hello, goodbye, thank you, please, s'il vous plaît. You're going to use the vous form. And there's another expression, which is the most practical two-word expression that I would teach anybody trying to learn French in 10 minutes. Je voudrais. It's the polite way of saying, I would like. And you could say je voudrais and point to something. Or if you have high school French, you can say je voudrais manger, aller, to eat, to go, to run, to buy, and learn five simple verbs: acheter, manger, aller. And you can point to things. So that's my suggestion. Another very good suggestion. Either take a business card with the hotel name or your address for taxis or write it out on a little card. You should always have uh, an address because you may or may not get into an Uber or a taxi that can understand your English or your French. So you want to have the address written out. I think that's a very practical thing. I take Uber and I took the G7 in May. I had a little problem with a car that didn't stop at the hotel and stopped 500 feet away in front of a store, and I couldn't see him from the hotel, and then charged me.
Mm.
And G7 wasn't very responsive, I found. So I went back to using Uber. Uber, if you have a problem like that, they just give you your money back without a question.
Mm.
So I still use Uber. I don't take the metro anymore, partially because I save my footsteps for museums and beautiful places. Underground walking does not thrill me. I see in all my little French things and Facebook and everything, there's a lot of pickpockets. I stand in front of where I want to be. To save money, I try to get a hotel next to an expensive hotel. That is to say, if the five-star hotel is going to be the safest, you can always get a cab there. There'll always be a valet out front. And if you can stay at a hotel nearby, across the street, around the corner, you know you can always be safer. It's called The Little Hotel Next Door. It's an article that I've never written, that I've wanted to write for years and years. I have very, very fine taste. I'm lucky to have had very fine experiences. But I really, I'm a retired teacher living on a budget. And so I do things to save money here and there. And then I splurge in other ways, like on a nice meal.
Mhm.
So there was another thing I wanted to say to people going to Paris. There is a website called Paris Je t'aime, which is spelled like this: Paris, J-E for je, which means I, and tem means I love you. And it's JETAIME.com. Paris Je t'aime, Paris, I love you. And it's the tourist office in Paris. And I went to the tourist office for the first time at the very end of COVID in 2021. It's in the old Hotel de Ville. It's the most gorgeous building. It's in the first arrondissement near all these historical places. We ate at any number of cafes nearby because I've been back since. And the tourist office, it may be crazy during the Olympics, but under normal circumstance, they're going to tell you which museums you need a pass for, how to get a timed museum entry, which days what museums are closed. Some are closed on Monday, some are closed on Tuesday. It's all very important that you do your research. It's not so easy. You have to know where to go when, and the tourist office is very helpful.
Yeah, they're a great resource. In any city, I always make sure I stop in there and check their website ahead of time too. They often have coupons or discounts to things too. I wanted to say something briefly about the language. I've only been to France once, sadly, hoping to go again very soon. But I had always heard that the French could be very aloof unless you try to make the effort to speak their language, because after all, you're in their country, and that it's sort of arrogant to go to their country and not even try to speak their language. And I had years and years of French in my educational background, but by the time I went, I'd forgotten a lot of it. So I brushed up on it a little bit and learned enough to ask some initial questions like the exactly ones you suggested. And that was great. That worked out great, except I spoke it well enough, and I guess with a good enough accent, that they thought I did speak French. And so then they just rattled off the answer as though I was one of them. And I was like, wait, hold on. And had to have them slow down and back up a little bit. So that's there are
But
pros
that's
and cons to that.
But that's a nice interaction. The thing that the French don't appreciate are the people who ask questions or demand things without the greeting.
Mhm.
And you can, usually they'll respond in English just because they hear a person's accent. I mean, I've been speaking French for, 65 years or so. And many people, they'll speak to me in English, or they'll say, "Oh, Madame, you speak French so well." But they know that I'm not French, and it's what I do when I go to a country, before I go to a country. Now, I rented a villa, actually, a 6-bedroom villa, my cousin second home in Montepulciano. Before I go to Italy, I sign up for Babbel. I watch everything in television in Italian. I do Google. I'm a teacher. I do my homework. I did the same before I went to Portugal for the first time. And normally, under normal circumstances now, I watch French television as much as possible. I watch the Parisian real estate program and Call My Agent and all these Netflix things, and Too Many Murders to Count. But a lot of the murderers have investigators who have their teenage children, or they're having a love affair with somebody. So it's not so heavy,
Mhm.
but I do a Zoom class in French. I really try to keep up with it. But
Mhm.
for the person who doesn't speak French, I think you could learn to say je ne parle pas français. I would learn 5 different expressions and smile and then go to English. Most French now, particularly in Paris, speak English. There are so many American tourists.
Mhm. Is there a certain, or are there certain times of year that are better to go to Paris than others? And forgetting about the Olympics because that's throwing everything off in that way, but in normal times.
Well, I have strong opinions because I was a teacher, and July and August are not the best places to go anywhere. First of all, August, the shops were closed in Paris for weeks. Everybody takes their vacation at the same time. Spring and fall are the loveliest times to travel anywhere in the world. May in France is difficult, and I'm always there in May. I mean, I travel in May regularly now, but May has bank holidays and church holidays, so it's a very difficult time. The rentrée in September is you want to check. I always suggest to people that they check the calendar because you really don't want to be in a city during design week or fashion week. It's all the hotels, the prices are exorbitant. Hotels change their rates. They have what they call a rack rate. Hotels have high season. Heaven knows that in the south of France, we rent in Cannes. Our apartment rental triples the minute the film festival starts. So we get out of there before May 15th. We go during shoulder season or reduced times. So I think it's very important if you're traveling and have an eye towards saving money or getting value for your money, that you try to avoid, that first weeks in September when the world starts again in Paris and all the business people come into the city and you have design shows and everything. You want to avoid the very busy holidays. I'm going back to Paris. I can't tell you how it is, but I went October to November in 21. It was a little chilly, but the fun was that, you started seeing the Christmas lights and the stores decorating, and it rained a bit. And some days were chilly, and I ate in a lot of onion soup lunches. I'm going back November 20th this year because my niece wants to go to, how nice is that? My 35-year-old niece wants to see Paris with me. And I said, I will make that happen. And she's a school teacher, so she's going to go during her Thanksgiving vacation.
Hmm.
So we're going to go to Christmas markets and stuff, and I'll bring cashmere and scarves and a hat, and I'm sure it'll be fine.
Sounds
Uh,
wonderful.
after the holidays, January, February, I mean, that's when prices are low, but you really have to like the cold. And I'm not that fond of the cold for January, February, March, but any other time is good.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine in January, February, March, it's still beautiful there, right? I mean, maybe not
Oh, it's
flowers, but
gorgeous.
yeah.
It's gorgeous. You know, it's really beautiful. Just the architecture. And I think
Mhm.
there's something to be said for traveling when there aren't any crowds. Although when I went after COVID, and we went like October 20th to November 15th or something, it was if as soon as the French allowed visitors again, we needed our QR codes and our proof of vaccination, and we ate outside and people had masks. But I want to tell you, there were lines everywhere in the rain to get into like Café des Fleurs or, on the left bank. It was as if the whole world couldn't wait to get back to Paris.
Hmm.
And that was November. You're in a city that people love to be. So I don't know when there's nobody there. They say that there's going to be 14 million people in a city that has 4 million inhabitants, for the Olympic Games.
Hmm.
I would not like that. I would not. I would have been in Paris during July 14th. I would never want to be there again during July 14th. But I don't like crowds. I'm claustrophobic, and I'd rather be there in November, to tell you the truth, or April.
And July 14th being Bastille Day.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah.
Nacional. And the crowds are outrageous. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
What about things like getting tickets ahead of time? Can you do that?
I always do that, but I have to tell you that I bought a concert ticket for the Sainte-Chapelle. I figured I haven't been to Sainte-Chapelle, that gorgeous little chapel, and they have concerts in the chapel. And I just noticed my charge. It was like $70 for the chapel and a concert. And then we ordered tapas first with a glass of wine. Well, I never got there. And I bought tickets for Giverny and I never went. But I just chalked it up to an extra meal or something. I'd rather have the ticket in my hand and not go than want to get there and not be able to.
Hmm.
But that's my choice. People spend money differently. I wanted to know that I had my place reserved. The day that it happened, it's happened a couple of times. It's been pouring rain and I've ordered a tour of a museum and I was with my granddaughter and she didn't want to get out of bed. Well, she's my granddaughter. Don't get out of bed. If it was my kid, maybe I would have made her get up. But it was my granddaughter and I wanted her to love Paris and not hate it because I pushed her to go in the rain to.
Hmm.
So I paid for a tour and didn't take it. These are decisions people make.
Yeah.
Um, as I say, I save money in many, many ways. And then I'm not in Paris often enough to be frugal there,
Hmm. Yeah.
you know?
I like that philosophy. Well, the last question I want to ask you is if somebody's going there for the first time or not, typically touristy place, and one really unsung that maybe only the locals know about place that you'd recommend they have to see.
I guess the Fondation Louis Vuitton, which is in Bois de Boulogne, the park of Paris, and it's a Gehry designed museum. It doesn't have my favorite artwork, but it's an architectural splendor with all these different terraces from which you can see Montmartre, the church, the Sacré-Cœur on the hill, and you can see the Eiffel Tower because there's nothing in your line of vision. So that's a place that I don't know that every person going to Paris would consider. I love the Jardin du Luxembourg, where kids they play with their little sailboats in the little bassin and the little pond when there's sticks and the sailboats. Again, I can't tell you that I know places for locals. I did eat at a restaurant, and it's in that article, Le Pérodin, that little bistro in the fifth arrondissement near the Pantheon, which is where all the national great French figures are buried near the Sorbonne. Turned out that the husband and wife who just bought the place worked for Alain Ducasse for 8 years. So, I mean, it's a little tiny typical bistro, not expensive, and yet the husband and wife team that own it come from this grand culinary background.
Hmm.
So that might be a little less known place. And it's spelled Perraudin.
Okay.
And yes, I book online all the time because I want to have a reservation. I want to know that I have a reservation. That's another thing. Call to confirm. I once got the smallest room where the bidet was practically touching the bed because I forgot to call the hotel. Well, I didn't know enough. This is 1990, my first trip to the south of France. I didn't know that I had to call to confirm. And I arrived late because of traffic and the rain, and he gave away my room.
Mm.
And he said, Madame, désolé, I'm so sorry. Désolé is a good word. I'm so sorry.
Hmm.
Excusez-moi is a good word, a good expression. But the call to confirm a restaurant reservation. Uh, it's these little polite things are important to know about.
Hmm. Hmm. That's a great suggestion. Well, this has been a joy, as always. It's always wonderful to talk to you, and it's wonderful to vicariously visit Paris with you until we can for real. Please tell us the name of your book again and also how people can follow you, your website and on social media and enjoy your Parisian and other travel adventures.
The book is called Forays in France, Forays, Forays in France, a flavorful memoir. Flavorful because there's so much food and fun, flavorful happenings. And there is a website up, foraysinfrance.com. It's a splash page. It's got a picture of the book. and everything will be on that website. There's also Irvina Lew, IRVINALEW.com. And I really appreciate it. I shall post a lot of I have like 5 new articles about France, including 2 in realfoodtraveler.com, which I'm posting online, and I appreciate that you are posting. But I hope the book will be on Amazon pretty soon. It's going through its last copy edit as we speak. I have my ISBNs and my copyright, and I can't wait to get it out.
That's so exciting. And I was so honored that I was one of a handful of people that you let look at a little snippet of the book in its early stages, and it was so engaging and so wonderful and so vivid, and it made it really easy to not only learn but to imagine everything that you were writing about, and while giving insight into your life personally. So it was a wonderful travelogue but also memoir, as the title says, and I just loved it, so I can't wait for the real thing to come out.
Before we stop, I do want to say something.
Yeah.
Along with the vignettes about my little crazy losing the car and, being pinched in the butt and things like that, I have included 3 different kinds of sidebars. One of them gives a little historic context about people and places and, like the history of an old restaurant or something. The other one gives real practical travel tips, like the things I've been talking about today. And the third gives how I prepare some of my favorite French dishes at home, because, I make quiche and onion soup, and I don't make the more exotic dishes, but I certainly cook. So those things are really for the reader, whether you're going to travel or not, they should be of interest. So I'm looking forward to other people expressing I hope it inspires people to travel. I mean, if this old lady can travel, others can.
Oh, it will. It absolutely will. Well, thank you so much, Irvina. And again, I'm honored that we're friends and that you share your fabulous articles with realfoodtraveler.com and with our readers and our podcast listeners. And you've actually done it. This is, I think, our third or fourth
Yeah.
podcast. I have several with you, and which I will share in the article as well. The Real Food Traveler podcast is available on iTunes, Spotify, Overcast, and a whole bunch of other streaming services. And wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can get it. We just won a wonderful award from the Society of American Travel Writers. It's actually our 4th from them for being best travel website from their Western chapter. So I'm very honored about that. And you, Irvina, and all of our writers contribute to making that happen. So
Congratulations.
thank you. Thank you. So with that, I will bid you adieu. We will have this podcast ready with all the live links and some wonderful photos, and we will see everybody soon. Thank you, Irvina. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.